So you heard it here. It's okay that none of us know what a digital twin is. No.
They are digital connections, and they are an intent to represent reality.
It's very easy to equate a visualization of the physical world as what a twin could be.
It's been phenomenal to see how advancements in technologies like LiDAR and reality capture and 3D meshes have just opened up a whole new range of possibilities.
So we talk often about the what, but I think the important aspect is the why. There's a deep need of understanding, having context, being able to make decisions based on information that they have.
Bring something to life, to bring a twin to life, to have it be a real twin, it has to have the physics of the object you're twinning.
Today we are talking about reality capture and digital twin. Two very big terms that are very broad. A lot of people are in early stages and some are down the road of integrating. Before we get rolling in the conversation though, we're gonna go ahead and do introductions. So let's get your name and title and a little bit of your perspective coming into this conversation.
Hi, I'm Sean Young. I'm the AEC and geospatial guy at NVIDIA. That's on my business card, if you want to.
Hey, Michel Besner, I'm the CEO of Preview 3D.
Kelly Watts, make sure that's on. I'm a contractor that works at DFW Airport, been there about 3 years, and known Matt for years, and my background with Faro and LiDAR, worked at Krummel, so I got a background in this space, and happy to be here.
Daniel Krummel from Woolpit, based down in Sydney, Australia, and running the sales for the team down there, but surveyor by background.
Scott McClure, I'm a defense contractor with Image Matters and TEPA LLC, focused primarily on policy as an enterprise architect.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. Diverse panel, diverse backgrounds. I think the organic conversation that will come out of this will be pretty interesting and valuable. And for those that are in the room, we want this to be very interactive as well. About halfway through the panel, we will grab one of these mics and we'll put it at this mic stand down here. And anybody that has questions, you can just come line up at the mic, and would love to, involve you guys in this process. So to start, I'd really like to start with laying the foundation of what is digital twin. I know it's right. Everybody kind of laughs when you start throwing out the term. So from your guys' perspective, how do you define digital twin?
Okay, well, I'm afraid to start this one because NVIDIA's got a very extreme definition of digital twin. I mean, everybody has their own definition. You guys are all going to have a different definition of digital twin. But for NVIDIA, the definition of digital twin is coming as close, recreating something like this building or whatever, with as close to reality as possible, so that the synthetic version behaves as much like the real version as possible. It's not, and I'm sorry if I don't want to spoil your guys' definition, but for us, it's not a rendering or it's not a point cloud, because that's not bringing anything to life. To bring something to life, to bring a twin to life, to have it be a real twin, it has to have the physics of the object you're twinning. So our digital twins that we're building with our customers and partners have physical AI, which means, like in the case of a factory, everything that's in the factory, the robots, the people, all the PLC controllers, IoT sensors, cameras, they're all represented inside the digital twin, and they all function in the same way as they do in the real world, which means mechanically and bound by the laws of physics. And therefore, what you can do in the case of a factory is simulate different assembly lines and do what's called virtual commissioning to time. How long does it take to, first of all, you've got everything. You've got the inventory coming in from trucks. You've got the finished cars, or in the case of a car factory, going out of the factory. Every little thing is put into the twin. And that way you could say with a high degree of certainty that, hey, if we change the line to be this way, the assembly line, we're going to get better productivity. Or if we move the inventory stack to over here, we're going to get better productivity. For us, that's a digital twin, and that includes energy, lighting, water, you name it.
Thank you, sure.
So actually, I'll spin the question, right, since it's a free form, right? So we talk often about the what, but I think the important aspect is the why, right? And so when you talk to customers, there's a deep need of understanding, having context, being able to make decisions based on information that they have. There's data scattered in so many systems in companies. And so, having that visual context, that understanding of, let's say, a factory, how it operates, and how can you improve that factory by, yes, doing redesigns of the facility, other things like that. But the pain is really about getting understanding of things, and that's why you need to build a digital twin that will be from data all the way to a visual layer, a system that can help you understand information that you already have in your hands, but you're not able to extract the context you often need.
Well, I wrote an article on this after someone posted their drone photo around their house, claiming it was a digital twin about 3 years ago. And you'll see, I think it had over 150,000 hits on that. And it's more than that. I mean, the point is, it's very easy to equate a visualization of the physical world as what a twin could be. But I think there's a deeper understanding in terms of how you organize your data. And there are many different data silos, and the one thing we can help to bring that data together with is a visual context and location for that data. But it's use case driven. So I think a digital twin in the construction design is very different than an operational twin that you're using for maintenance. Yep. But there are foundations for how data flows and how it surfaces, and how, at the end of the day, it's all about decision process. Can you make effective decisions with the information you have? And does it give you more context to how to make those decisions effectively?
Yeah, I'm probably not going to get too much into definitions in the talk that I'm giving later today. Sort of covers off the same thing, where instead of talking about the definition of a digital twin, because you'll hear many different renditions, talking about some of the projects that we've been doing in my part of the world that come under that digital twin banner. And one of the things that I've been really interested to see is in different jurisdictions in Australia, like Western Australia in particular, digital twin is like a little bit of a dirty word, because it's just, you mention that and people get too fired up about it. So it's sort of best to just say, oh, we're doing something a little bit different. But I would sort of say what I have seen is in a lot of other places, it's been a way to get some attention, maybe get some funding for projects. Exactly what it is, they might be digital twins mean different things to different people. So that's.
So I just like the rest of us, I think I'm going to dodge the question a little bit. But I think all the points are actually extremely valid, and it is a very use case driven thing. I was a founding chair of the Digital Twin Integration Subcommittee for the National Institute of Building Sciences, had an excellent team of 40 engaged people across multiple industries, and we didn't come up with one definition. We actually looked at the Digital Twin Consortium's definition. We looked at the National Academies of Sciences definitions. We looked at one of our researchers' definitions, soon to be Dr. Zara Gorbani. And what we kind of came to is, there's kind of a level set that we need to have about the reason for the parts of the definition. So I'm going to just kind of say, it seems like across all the industries, not just AECO, digital twin has either digital connections that are maybe simulated if they're not actually physically connected, but that they are digital connections and they are an intent to represent reality, right? They have a fit for purpose use case, and usually they're synthesizing and fusing data. Is that kind of general parameters or properties of a digital twin? So that's kind of my answer.
So you heard it here. It's okay that none of us know what a digital twin is. No. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the ecosystem, right? Again, we've got different players here coming from different industries and different project types. What are the technologies that go behind it? And or, since we also focus a lot on capture and geospatial here, how does reality capture play a role in digital twin? Because one thing you hear a lot, right, is can you have a digital twin without a representation of the physical real world? Is it the data that's behind it? And I think there's kind of two angles there. So I'd love to hear some thought on that.
In order, the same order?
You guys don't have to go in order. You can battle over the, no.
You can step in
as long
you
as you share mic time, you can jump around.
Well, I think that for me, there's a key element with capturing reality is that how do you make sure that your environment, your digital twin, is the single version of the truth, right? Because how many times I've heard, engineering teams, they have a CAD model and they're not sure if it's exactly the right version, right? And so you start making engineering decisions on the wrong version, and then you go and it's not working out. Or like I was talking to a customer last week, and they had a pump in mind. They wanted to install in a new facility. They were sure about the model and everything, and then they got the scanned version of the pump. It was a flipped configuration on the piping. So they would have just assumed that the pump was right. They would have put all the piping, getting ready to install the machine, and would be like, oh, it doesn't work. And they have to redo all the work because you didn't. And so in reality capture is, and it's hard to cheat reality, right? You capture what is there, right? Including the shit out there. Like, it's never a perfect world. And CAD is always a simplification of reality. But for me, it's like, it's not one or the other. Like, you need CAD, you need scanning data, you need different representations of the world as we know it, right?
Yeah, I think picking up on that thread, it's how do you manage all the change? And when you're in a large critical infrastructure where change is happening every day, how do you have a plan in place for that to use the visualization or reality capture effectively? So that it gets tricky. And if that's your primary thing that you're depending on, it can fail you. So the trust of the data is really important. So we start to think about the different tools and the different types of reality capture we can use. I don't need LiDAR to 1/4 inch accuracy in every place of our airport. If we kept ourselves to that rule, yes, for engineering and design and construction, but for operations, if I'm just using it to visually reference something, I don't need that. So kind of thinking about the right tools to deploy to gather the information at the fidelity and frequency that you need, I think is important, because then it becomes an operational tool to keep things updated.
Yeah, just from my survey background, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that have had a lot more experience in the industry than me, but going back 20 years of how we would go and capture or create a digital representation of a road or a street or anything for design, it's been phenomenal to see how advancements in technologies like LiDAR and reality capture and 3D meshes have just opened up a whole new range of possibilities. I mean, one area that I think would be good to start to see would be crowdsourcing. So how do you take, now that a lot of people are walking around with cameras and LiDARs and in their pocket, how can you take that data to keep things more up to date? I mean, I saw a really nice one on the coast of New South Wales a couple of weeks ago when I was there on holiday. And to help monitor coastal change, they basically had a little mount set up that people could take a photo and then upload it. So that way you're getting regular updates. Because it had the very specific mount, that way they've kind of got some controls and they're making sure they know exactly where that photo has been taken, and they can look at how the coastline's changing over time.
Or you chase the Pokemon to the edge of the, right? Oh, sorry.
I'd like to throw a different twist on it just a little bit. I think reality capture, it's not necessary for a digital twin. You don't always have to have a visual representation of the space or the visual. Yeah. But I think it's the most accessible entry point for a lot of people, right? So when you look at a floor plan, and some of us are familiar with like electrical blueprints and those sorts of things, it actually takes kind of a weathered eye to be able to interpret that. It's an abstraction, and reality capture really provides an absolute reference so that you can see. I saw the scans of the traffic that was going through, and like you immediately know where that camera is covering. Right, and that kind of accessibility, I think, is something that the culture that's going to depend on that digital twin really needs. So that's where I see reality capture really kind of making a connection.
I think just one more point to this, just in general, we're humans, we create or we communicate through seeing things. That's why the age-old site visit, I need to see it to believe it, right? So by eliminating the need to communicate through words or written form and to be able to show something on how it works, how it performs, the impacts, all of those things is really how we as humans kind of communicate. So with the twin, again, it doesn't have to necessarily be a BIM model or reality capture. It needs to be a visualization to help communicate the ideas around how a business process works or how you need to attend to something. So I think that's the way we can kind of look in a bit more of an abstract thinking. And again, it's about solving a business problem, right?
Absolutely.
I'm going to answer the other part of your question, which is like, what are the technologies in a digital twin? But first, I think there are two types of digital twins. There's the planning digital twin, and then there's the operational digital twin. And the planning digital twin, if it's a greenfield project, you don't have anything as built to capture, then reality capture doesn't really come into play in terms of the construction, but it does in terms of the geography. So you need, the terrain and such. If you're doing an as-built like renovation, then you want to do reality capture because you need the as-built. And then if you're getting into the operational digital twin, when the facility we're building is fully operational. And by the way, for those of you in the AEC business, I think like that's the way you justify a digital twin, because it's very expensive to build a digital twin that ends with the construction of the building, because it's a very short shelf life. And digital twins, the way I'm talking about them, are very expensive to build. It just takes a lot of human power to do the work. So if you can get your client to agree that they need to have a digital twin of their facility in the operational stage, then you can rationalize building a digital twin right up at the design and stage and use it for construction. But in terms of the core technologies, like one of the key elements of a digital twin is being able to homogenize all the data inputs. And the clients that NVIDIA is working with are dealing with, they could have 30, 40, 60, 100 different data inputs: CAD, BIM, 2D, PDFs, all sorts of one-dimensional data, IoT data, etc., and of course, reality capture. So that's just one of the data inputs. And the key element of the digital twin is being able to like harmonize all this data without losing anything. And also, like if you're dealing with one of those planning digital twins, the design data is changing all the time. Like Revit's being updated, you need to keep up. The digital twin needs to keep up with those updates in a non-disruptive way. Once you have all those geometries harmonized, homogenized into the digital twin that is the representation, it doesn't do anything. So now you have to have physics, and now you have to have the things that are supposed to move, moving, and the things that are supposed to be sending signals, and that's enabled through physics and simulators on like IoT devices and controllers, and people that are walking around your construction site, your factory, your warehouse, and conveyor belts that are actually moving. And then finally, so that's physics, and to get visual accuracy, you need physics too. It's called ray tracing, and you need that because the next level, the ultimate level, is using this environment to train an AI. Because the AI, when it goes out in the real world, needs to know what it's supposed to do. And if that building has never existed, how's the AI going to know it until it gets there? So you create this virtual version of whatever the AI is going to live in, and that's where the AI learns how to do its thing. So it has to be physically accurate.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting for us, like we talked to a lot of big companies, and nobody's against the virtue of like having a digital twin that will help you better plan, better operate, efficiency, reduce travel, whatever are all the amazing benefits that we can think of. But most companies are overwhelmed about how do we get there, right? The end state is fantastic. You're getting all this data connected, all of this stuff. And they also come back like, well, we need a massive ROI. Otherwise, we can't justify the massive budget we'll need to build all of this. And so we try a lot to take this as a form of a journey with the customer. Say, okay, let's start very small. Like in our case, we often start with a very basic engineering project. You've got challenges in upgrading and doing a turnaround project or a small CapEx project. Start small. And once you've already done a reality capture-based CapEx project, you have a beginning of a digital twin. It doesn't have 95% of what you'll end up having over the years, but you have something. You say, look, here's our space. Here's our CAD data connected to this reality capture data, and here's how we've done our design. And you can start evolving from that. And I think that's the biggest mistake right now is that we try to sell the whole whale of the digital twin, forgetting that most companies, they need help to go through the journey. And
You're jumping into a topic I want to hit. Yeah, let's just keep going on that a little bit because it is complex. It is expensive when you think about the long road. So what are some of the low-hanging fruits of the value that you're seeing in conversations?
Well, I think one thing you got to think, you do want to do your first project that is a small, scalable project you can get feedback from right away. But you want to pick a project that you can scale. Because if you want leaders to buy in, they want big problems to be solved. So as I mentioned in one of our previous presentations, like the service provider contracts are massive. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. So those operational improvements we can make there are in the tens of millions. So therefore, the use case has tremendous value, and you can point back to that value. So, assessing the ROI, and most of this is, it is forecasting. There are things that you have to do to kind of estimate what those costs are going to be, or those savings, cost avoidance are going to be. But trying to figure out, like, I do agree on the small project executable. You don't want to get into a 2-year project and try and search for value, right? You want something that, between 3 and 9 months, you can prove something is functionally good and operational, but again, then you're only 5% implemented against the organization. So how do you get to like 80% quickly?
So I'm actually kind of interested on this idea that reality capture as a technology for digital twin and carrying it forward as a bridging strategy. Shameless plug, 2:30, I've got a session on exactly that topic from my own personal perspective. But I think one of the technologies that people kind of overlook is not actually like bits and bytes or some piece of hardware or something along those lines. It's the skill to work interdisciplinary functions and bring them together, right? And so if you think about, you've got water, electrical, you've got people, you've got cars, you've got Wi-Fi units, no doubt, routers and stuff like that in the airport, and all of those require some great unifier to kind of bring them together, right? And that's one of the things that, to me, as a technology, reality capture is amazing because it leverages location, right? And location is, space is the great unifier. How's that, right? Like, we have individual points in space that we can rely on. And so reality capture makes that real. And now everybody can kind of come to the same ground when they start talking about this Wi-Fi router and how it's affected by the number of people, which is a human system, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of a thought there that cropped
just
up.
to riff on that, there's a lot you can do with that, because once you have something captured in reality, first of all, with like Gaussian splats, or radiance fields, as we're learning in this conference, you can get like a very high fidelity visual, and you get the data that you need with precision measurement. But with AI can tell you what you're looking at. AI could say, this is water, and this is a wall, and this is a jet about to move. AI knows all that stuff. So there's probably a lot. It's probably a really interesting insight that there's a lot you can do just as a capturing reality as a base layer for a digital twin.
Well, and I think not just reality capture. We're at a geospatial conference, and a lot of us are in the business of doing mapping, right? And mapping, especially for long linear assets, can you really expect to get a full 3D point cloud of a city? Well, you can, from image base, but it can be overwhelming. So I think merging the mapping world with the 3D world, scan to a certain level of fidelity and accuracy that you need for the use case, and be able to merge those. That's been really helpful for us. We have over 250 different data layers in Esri. So, whenever we can pull that data in and not have to move the data, it's really helpful.
I think one of my favorite stories that I always come back to of how you prove the value or show that it's done something was it was a pharmaceutical facility in Singapore, and we were working for Lend-Lease, and the BIM manager there basically got us to come in, do a scan, create a 3D model, and then they used that to check what they were going to then be putting in terms of the new plant. They found from what they had in design, there was like 200 clashes, so they then redesigned to avoid that, and they ended up with like 4 clashes on site. And I remember him telling me that he presented to then his bosses or the people that he needed to get convinced of this, and he literally just had it on 3 slides. He's like, we estimate that these 200 clashes would have cost us this amount in construction, and all of a sudden, it wasn't spending money on the digital twin. It was, if you call that a digital twin, but it was, hey, if we get this, it's going to save us money downstream.
Well, a lot of our customers talk about risk avoidance, right? Like, can eliminate issues that will happen, right? Is a key factor for that. Like, it's not easy to measure as much, but it's clearly an impact on the business.
It's interesting because there's clearly some different thoughts here based on the life cycle that we're touching, on the design build versus on the operations and maintenance side. But there are business needs that are quite different too, right? And in construction projects and in design, there's a lot of moving parts that will critically impact whether the project is successful or not. So there's a clear need for visualization to match the clashes to the design or to simulate those outcomes before you actually move forward. In the operational world, you do have some of that, but a lot of it is the information, the business systems that the organization has. Their maintenance management tools, their asset capital planning tools, their documents, all asset documentation. So it's bridging that kind of integration path to bring data together so that I can just ask Copilot if it's ingested and pulling data to an asset or a system to give me an answer if we talk about generative AI, or if it's even just the sensing capabilities that we have to understand the environmental impact from cold or hot weather and how that's going to impact my assets. So be able to see it, understand it, ask, and bring that data in. But there are different data sets, so they're kind of different realities, and we talk about that from a different lens. But
Totally.
it'd be nice to be able to kind of have a better handoff. I think that's what we all struggle is a construction project happens, and it's a project. It's not an enterprise. We have lots of projects. So how do you change the project mentality into an enterprise and consume that for operations?
Yeah, I think that's a big one because historically, right, scanning and capturing and creating models has been happening a lot on a project basis, and you get to the point you're like, we're scanning the same thing over and over, and like it was used just for the architect, but now it gets thrown away. Why, I think that's where we're starting to see maybe that shift of companies understanding how could we let that data be used for more things and live longer. So that ultimate dream, right, of not every project having different teams that are like keeping all the data to themselves, but at the owner level, understanding the value of that data, and you only get certain things captured once, and now you share across a team, but it takes that whole project team communicating really early and understanding who's going to pay for it, right? That's another part.
And I think the pay for it part, that's part of the problem. I have engineering firms that approach me to help with their projects, but the capital project's based on the construction and design of the project, not on operating the building for 10, 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. So the change in mentality has to also happen at an ownership level to bring the operations into the conversation so that they have a real footprint on what their data looks like downstream. And that's where there's still a bit of a disconnect.
Amen.
I think that the one thing that's often missing in the conversation is like from a tech perspective, capture, CAD data, whatever you're talking about, there are stages where it makes sense, right? And so we need to have a better understanding of like data starts at, first idea that you have about something and it evolves to a design project, construction, implementation, operation. And the data sets you're going to have across that needs to be intertwined in different levels because you're showing someone a facility just to go out and do maintenance. It's not going to be the same data and representation that if you want to do a turnaround or an upgrade, right? But each of these snapshots of information have a purpose in certain phases of a company or manufacturing process.
Yeah, and that's why I think we get a little distracted sometimes with the flashy visuals when it really, the business problems are solved by the data sources. Mm-hmm. So you really got to get that enterprise data strategy in place and the platforms you're planning to use and how they're going to communicate with each other so you can surface the right amount of data to the right user. And that's the other thing. It's just, cramming a bunch of data into an interface is not the business problem being solved. Yeah. It's understanding what does this stakeholder need to do his job and giving him the appropriate amount of information to solve their problem. But making the data flexible enough so we can give different stakeholders different views. And that also includes like the interfaces we use. Some people are going to be communicating from an iPhone, and that field work needs to be done from an iPhone. Well, that's quite limiting with certain interfaces. So you got to think through kind of how you deliver data to visualization platforms or consumption platforms is what I would say. How are you going to consume the data from different perspectives?
That does take me to where I want to ask the next question is, we've talked a lot about business problems and where we find the value. Now, if we could talk a little bit about the technical problems of where things are today. So there are so many platforms, there are so many things that are siloed. What comes to mind as some of the barriers to the growth and adoption of kind of this dream state of digital twin or, for across all projects? What are some of the technical issues we see?
Well, I would say that the updating the information, right? Like you can spend a lot of time building, a twin and it looks all perfect. Then the next day it's out of date. Like there's things that have changed. There's been repairs. There's been a bunch of stuff. And so how do you enable and facilitate that process, right? If you just taking about reality capture, ultimately you're going to manage a mosaic of different scans that you'll do over the course of multiple years, right? It's going to be different scans, different type of scanning, different use and purpose on that same space, right? And so you need to think about how do I compose my space with different inputs, different variations and things, and that evolves over time. And so you cannot just say, here's a digital twin, here's my beautiful rendering, because it's like, well, it was beautiful when you did it, is it, how do you update it? How do you make that maintainable? And also the question is, who's going to do that job? of maintaining, right? Because people that are in maintenance and operation, they're paid to maintain and operate. They're not paid to keep up to date a digital twin. And at Preview 3D, one of our beliefs, and that's why we've done a lot of investment into the engineering side of things, is that engineers are trained to manage a version of the truth. Their license as an engineer depends on signing designs of this is accurate and this will be, you could lose your license if you're doing a shitty job, right? This is one of the few jobs in many industries, same thing with surveyors, where their trade is linked to their execution of their work. So they'll inherit most likely the maintainability of a digital twin. So if they don't see value in using the tools for themselves, and you're all talking about improving, virtual tours and, operational stuff and whatever else, then who's going to maintain that? And that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
I talked to some of the most sophisticated customers on the planet, and surprisingly, even the most sophisticated have this common problem: they don't have the data. Yeah. They don't have the data. This thing was built in 1960, and I don't even have the the blueprints or whatever. So yeah, reality capture is important because that's the way to solve the problem. You just go and scan the building, and you have the mesh, and they need a mesh for the types of digital twins they want to do. The other thing is, the other problem we encounter in factory and warehouse environments is things are moving all the time. Things are changing, and the reporting system doesn't always account for everything that's changed. So our customers are actually scanning regularly. Some customers scan every week, like the entire facility, and then you compare that to you just bring that into the digital twin. The idea with the digital twin, I think, where I disagree with some of you guys, ultimately you want to have a single source of truth, because if you have multiple projects, you have multiple sources of truth. How do you know which one to believe? If you have a digital twin, then people have had to align on the fact that there is one source of truth, and it's here. And so by updating that source of truth with scanned data, you can do it every week. And you don't have to keep the data as a scan, or you can keep the scan as a layer and then update the geometry based on the scan data, etc. There's a lot of ways to do it. But I think, the other thing people, surprisingly, I don't know if this applies to people in this room, struggle with is compute power. Some customers are using computers from the 80s. It's time, it's time to update your system. There's a lot of compute going on inside of that thing. Yeah, things have changed a lot in the last couple of years. AI and physics and digital twins, and you need a computer that can handle the power.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think on that, and I'm sure other people have had this same experience. If you go out and you've got this amazingly rich data set, and then you give it to the the client, and they go, "Oh, can I just get some contours out of this, or just a CAD drawing?" And they just want to bring it back down to that basic level, and they're not. So I'd probably say, I actually think technology has advanced pretty well, and we're probably at a stage that we need more adoption and more people doing it, to then get to the point of, all right, technology now needs to go that next leap. So it's probably more people is the barrier, and that acceptance of change.
I think partly on the people side is roboticizing the capture and automating it and using less expensive technology to get baseline information is a big one. But, our biggest challenge has been less with the reality capture per se. We can go scan stuff. We have 4 different business departments that own scanners, right? So it's a little less of that. It is a cost factor because the complexity and the size and scale. So the skill sets are a little harder to find. And, with the procurement process, that can be challenging. But when we talk about the data availability, it's the other types of data, the textual data and unstructured data that's madness to try to be able to incorporate and relate. So when we look at a lot of vendors in these closed systems, really trying to eliminate that and look for enterprise architecture that's open. So that's been a big one. So if you can get some hard rules that you just say, no, we're not going to go down that path. We're going to keep things open. So with our IoT, it's been using MQTT as an open protocol. Now, anything we do at the airport, for the most part, if it's IoT driven, we're going to own the transport from the end device to the software platform. That allows us to change platforms or pipe that data to another location. The twin starts to be where the IoT and the CMMS and all this rich data are in nodes and are contextualized. And that's for me then to publish that to the end interface. So like what you're talking about, we want to give enough data that is relevant to act on, But for some people, you don't want to overwhelm them. They don't need other data. So when we're in like our IOC, we have big screens. I don't want all of the level of detail. I want to surface immediate information I can act on. So that's what I mean when it's not about necessarily having a whole bunch of different tools, centralizing the data, contextualizing the data, making it available, but then be able to surface it based on the stakeholders' needs of how they want to consume the data.
Yeah, Matthew, you mentioned technologies, right? But there's non-bits and bytes type technologies too, right? So enterprise architecture, as an enterprise architect, I'm a little biased, but I think it's critical, particularly because from an interoperability standpoint, you better be able to like conceptualize all of these different systems and the way that they relate. And enterprise architecture forces you to go through that process deliberatively, right? And the second component is what we're talking about here is the psychosocial element, which is you have a community that is going to be working with this thing. Their identities are wrapped up in their role, right? It's one of the things I love about fit for purpose. Digital twin, if we can agree that it's a fit for purpose tool, then you have to start thinking about who is the end user in those use cases. And that end user, in my case, DoD, we've got troops, right? Airmen, they self-select. And there's a small book out there called The Masks of War. And each person that goes into the Army is self-selecting for a different reason than a person that goes into the Air Force. And if you're going in as a plumber into the Air Force, maybe you're thinking innovation, but maybe you're thinking wrenches. Do you really want that tablet? So from a psychosocial perspective, there's a technology that's needed for change management to bring the end user to a degree of problem solving in that digital space. And understanding that, I think, is a psychological or a sociological skill set, a technology that's a little more needed than is applied.
I do want to let it keep going, but I'm going to grab one mic and put it down in this mic stand, and anybody that wants to participate in the conversation, bring some questions, we'll start intermixing those in the conversation as well.
But you brought a really interesting point about adoption, right? And I think that the big change will happen with the new generation, the digital natives, right? Kids now, they are born with tablets in their hands. They're born with cell phones. They didn't ever had a world where that did not exist. So for them to be connected, 24/7, and with a device in their hands, that's normal, right? And they expect tools that are as easy as playing a game. That's what they're looking for. They don't want these complex, outdated systems. They want to be mobile. And so that's going to be easier for this adoption compared to the older generations that are not in those technologies.
Let me in a healthy way, conflict with that just a little bit, right? Because there's always a part of the population. I study the stasis agent. I study the resistance in change management. And there's always going to be a portion of the population that is outside of that, right? And a lot of times we shove them off to the side. Well, if we just keep saying your desire to use a wrench and not a tablet, that's not a part of our culture. That's not a part of our culture, and we do that to the electrician, and we do that to the HVAC technician, and we do that to the space planner or whatever it might be. What ends up happening is you build what's called a creeping crisis, right? All of these people feel sort of diasporatic. They're no longer connected with the thing that they appreciate. And all that I'm kind of saying there is, absolutely, there are more people who are coming into this and they want that and they're more familiar with it. But we're still very multi-generational and change is happening so fast that, and I think I see a lot of heads nodding here, that, we got to be thinking about changing into that digital twin future. And I think doing that, it's important not to overwrite those people who do see themselves separately.
I think it's a fascinating topic of discussion, actually, because it comes up when I talk to people about AI, because everybody's like, AI is going to replace people. And no, it's not. AI is going to eliminate the things that people don't like to do so they could focus on the things that they love to do, that is like the artistry part of their work. And a good example is you were talking about like the control center, right, at DFW. So you can imagine an airport, and we've got these digital twins and all the cool tech showing all this stuff and all these dashboards. What person could possibly find any needle in this haystack? There's way too much data. As we're automating everything and digitizing everything, it's great, but it's way too much for a person, but it's not too much for an AI. So, and what person wants to be sitting there in front of a screen all day going like this, looking for the red flashing light? Yeah. So AIs are going to help us by doing that work that humans can't do and we can't afford to pay them to do, and freeing those people up to do more important work at DFW.
Yeah, and we can't anticipate that someone's going to be in front of their screen for 8-10 hours a day. Like, it's just not realistic. So, we do our insight monitoring with the QA and our service providers in the morning. It's like a half an hour review. But everything else is event driven. So they'll get messages and they'll have an interface to go to, but it's going to support them. It's changing the thoughts on how to work digitally, but it's not really working digitally. It's getting support with digital tools to continue to do the job. The twin itself doesn't perform work in terms of fixing things, right? It gives you information to support the workforce to do what they need to do more efficiently. So we want to make sure that we communicate that to the executives, because there really is some confusion. They feel it's magic and that you're going to solve all these problems and I'm going to reduce my workforce. It doesn't necessarily work that way, right? So we look for the improvements that we can make.
I'm going to change up my Q&A plan. DJ, could you actually help, instead of everyone having to squeeze out, if you want to do hand raise, we'll run the mic around for questions. So somebody has to break the ice. Somebody has to bring a question to the panel here.
Anyone?
First question.
You noticed the hoodie, right?
I see it.
Earlier on, you guys mentioned crowdsourced data collection. I don't know if we can maybe riff on that a little bit. As much as I like Pokemon, maybe we can do something more serious.
I can give you a really real-world example that I was fascinated by. For managing road surfaces, they're crowdsourcing vehicle sensors. So the vendor that we spoke to up in Northern Europe has, I don't remember if it's Sweden or Finland, but they've tied into all the VW vehicles. So every vehicle that's driving across our airport every day, the sensor data is being fed to this tool and then visually showing points of interest that need attention. So it's really quite fascinating that we can passively collect that data. Same with cameras on vehicles. I think there's a lot of really good examples for that that we can leverage.
Hi. So as a younger person that was sort of not born with the tablet in his hand, but grew up with it quite a bit, I do have a question about, I want to make sure I understand what you were saying earlier about skilled labor. And I think I understand your point, but you're saying not to alienate skilled labor by making tools that are only for people who understand tech and focus a lot on the tech world. Is that correct?
I think that summarizes it really well, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, if I can build on that just a moment. I think what it is really about understanding that person, understanding that end user. What is it that drives that end user? And supplying a tool that meshes with their identity, right? With their culture, with where they see themselves, so they don't feel threatened by it, but also so that you're getting the best insight. If you want to talk crowdsourcing, right? We should be crowdsourcing insights. So how are you going to get insight from somebody if they're not comfortable, right? So I think to kind of build on that, understand that end user and try to meet them with this tool.
One other thing that we came across is language barriers. Our service providers were speaking different languages and we're not English first. So we have to think about, well, how do we incorporate that? Because it does come down to the individual user. And if you find paper or you find anything that is going to undermine that program, all the things that you're doing up here in the twin don't matter because you haven't solved that fundamental problem of how they work. So it all has to be a root down to the point of how people are working today and how do we improve that performance of how they do their job, or how they build their design, or how they do their construction. So those are the things that we need to start with, and how's the interface going to be able to navigate some of those complexities and challenges to get to decisions quickly?
And feel free to raise your hand if you have a question, even while we're answering certain questions, just so we have a queue to run around to. Oh, you got one now? Okay.
Yeah, hi, Seth Taylor from Chevron. Really appreciate the discussion this morning. Just maybe a couple add-ons or pushbacks from my side. I think the notion that right now I think digital twins are used a lot for augmenting workflows, like you said, a place you can go to get data faster, perhaps insights faster. But I also believe if you're not architecting and imagining these things to be solutions that are going to be allowing predictions and prescriptive in the future, you're probably missing the boat on the investments that you're making in that underlying data infrastructure and the contextualization required to bring all that data in, right? I think that's, and it probably speaks a little bit to why does it take some companies a long time to move forward with it, because it is pretty, the investments you're making have to be impactful over time, not just in a 9-month period, right? And I think digital twin is very unique in that respect, in that it is kind of this agent for transforming the way we work, and you do need to imagine it as kind of a series of progressions along a digital maturity curve to get to that point. The other thing I just wanted to comment on was about AI. I have a very different perspective on that, unfortunately, and perhaps it's because I work for a large company, but I agree. I don't think anyone is losing their job right now because AI is coming and maturing, but I absolutely agree that companies are looking at what are the implications for my workforce 5 years from now, and I think we should probably be, aware that is the reality, right? I do think jobs in the future are going to be lost because of the pace at which AI is hitting us right now, and the opportunities that will mean for how work is done in companies.
Let me qualify that lightly. I think if you want job security in the future of AI, then learn AI. Just understand AI, because nobody's going to, as companies are investing in AI, they're not going to want to lose people who understand how to use that technology.
I mean, tell that to an operator.
Right.
Perhaps, I don't know. That's not universal.
That's a good point.
And in line with what you're saying, right? Like there's a growth curve.
But it's way down by fire.
Matthew, do we need to worry?
Sounds like we're on standby.
Okay.
If we hear that again, we'll listen to it.
Okay. But really, it's real easy to get horizon locked on what a digital twin could be, on any technology that's out there, right? And we start talking predictive, 100% on board with the value that you can do, you can create through predictive digital twins, that kind of thing. But you want to also recognize that as an organization, you're responsible for your culture, right? And you don't want to get so horizon locked that you steamroll the folks that are really going to give you true value, right? And so, sure, think about predictive analytics for the future, but is that the highest priority problem to solve at the moment, right? And then artificial intelligence, like absolutely, it is a new member in our society in many ways, and it's time to figure out how do we bring that new foreign entity, right, into our lives without feeling like we're getting wiped out by it, right? So maybe just an urging caution on don't forget the priority are the people in that moment, and they've got to transition, and they transition a little more slowly than you hope in a lot of cases, right?
So I mean, for me, like I like the parallel of the .com, right? At first, you had to have a website. There was the big thing. There was a lot of transaction around that, and really Web 2.0 when you had clear purpose applications in the web, right? CRM system like Salesforce.com and Amazon to order things online and all that stuff. That's really we start to see real categories of true use cases of where the web became very powerful, right? And I think the digital twin is a great concept right now where we're still pretty much scratching the surface on all of this. It's still like all the tech companies are still building the stuff as we go. There's still all of the maturity, even with the biggest companies. This is not like, okay, this is all figured out, it's all working. And I think that, as much as we all have ideas and visions of where things will become, I think that I like to go back and ask the question to customers, like, what are your pain problems? Like, what are you trying to solve? And how can we find solutions today that will create value over progressive steps that ultimately is in line to this vision, like a digital twin, all that stuff. But the bigger vision is going to happen in maybe 10 years from now. Right.
It's only going to happen 10 years from now if you start today. Our customers are starting today, so I don't agree that it's something that's far off in the future. The technologies are here today. They're solving problems. You have to have a real business rationalization. Predictive analytics is a great example. It's the reason why customers want to build digital twins. Water treatment facilities don't want a digital twin just because they need something cool. They need a digital twin because they need to predict when something's going to malfunction. And they need to have a plan for what to do when that happens. They need to predict, water level rises, and how do you don't wait for a rainy day. You simulate that. So digital twins are now, they're happening, and it's a business opportunity for everybody in this room. Sorry, buddy.
I'd love to pose kind of on this topic too, right? So change is happening. Technology is, growing. The adoption is coming. I think it's our job as a community, right, to find the technology, embrace it, figure out how to use it. Even if we don't, there's certain things it's like it is going to replace a job, right? It's like I come from a survey background. Surveyors are hesitant to technology, right? They're like, that's video game stuff. I just want to go do my normal. Well, if we are hesitant to the technology, someone else is going to do it, and it's going to continue to increase and get into our normal business practice. I think it's our job to figure out how can we integrate it, how can it benefit, and I think there will be roles, right, that get replaced by certain processes, but there's always going to be change, so we have to embrace that. What I would like to ask or pose is, what are some of the skill sets, if we're thinking about the next 5 and 10 years, that people should be focused on? The jobs that are going to be created with this change of ecosystem and new technologies and ways of doing things. If we are talking about that change, what are some skill sets people should be thinking about?
Well, I'm going to say psychology, but that's probably not what you're looking for.
AI. A lot of the digital twins we're building are for AI. So the more you know about AI, the better. But then, it's the usual stuff. Most of the people in this room are probably qualified to get involved in digital twins. 3D, reality capture, computer programming, rendering, stuff like that. Physics, a little bit. Simulation, computational fluid dynamics, stuff like that. But AI is the thing you have to develop.
Well, I think even just more foundational for AI is the relationships between data. So understanding ontologies and being able to construct those is really foundational. So if we can get a grip on how we do that, that will make a big difference, like the relationships and hierarchies of data.
Yeah. Just to add on to that real quick, if you want to start with AI, to your point, data science is the foundation layer.
Yeah.
You have to have data scientists on your team.
Yeah, the ontologies, the architecture behind it, like what is it that most people have a concern about AI with is the hallucinations, right? Structured data is better data, right? So if you've got relationships mapped out and you understand how your functions in your organization are working, that's a fundamental skill set. Again, enterprise architect, sorry.
Yeah, and I think there's a real opportunity for owners to claw back some of that work that's being done by service providers too, and you'll start to see that. So with the comments on the Chevron side, by having programs in place to kind of have some of your workers, your people that have the knowledge, you kind of move up on a digital role, even if they're kind of not a digital person, their knowledge is transformational. So having those people brought up into different roles, making those roles, when people see there's opportunity that they can embrace, and then you're going to have your true champions that are important to their organization that can get rewarded. So we're trying to do that ourselves. We don't have a lot of BAS technicians that are really savvy. So how do we upskill or bring in new resources? And then we do want to start to claw back a little bit of our service contracts. We trust a lot of the service contractors that go out for bid every 3 to 5 years. It's crazy, right? And if we can reduce those size of those service contracts or start to internally manage things that we just couldn't before, it was just too complicated, it's too much work. The digital twin is enabling us to do things a little bit more efficiently and proactively, or just based on priority. Those types of things can be pretty significant.
I have a question for you built off of that question of the skill sets. So you implemented this digital twin.
Yeah, we can listen.
Zoom. I'll care.
I think we'll get an alarm if we do need to move.
Hopefully it'll be clearer than that. Yeah.
Yes.
So you saw missteps. You had to have seen missteps along the way. right? And was there any particular skill set that jumped out to help solve those missteps?
Well, one of them was with how data was originally captured, and we had some issues with some of the point clouds and models, so we went through those pains. So making sure that the competence of your contractor can deliver what you need. This before I came on, and then picking the right project. They chose to pick our biggest problem child to solve as first POC, so that made it really difficult to get to value quickly. Whereas we could have taken and onboarded something that was relatively new, data would have flown much easier. We could have got to an operational value quicker.
And as we still finish, we'll have one more question if we want to handle this.
So to your point about the quality of the scan, which is a big problem, right? There's a lot of scanning providers out there that do shit work, right? And because having a scanner is just walking around, hey, I've got scan data as a point cloud. You need to understand the control points, and the quality of the work is important, right? That's a really important amount. But it's just not that. It's any data that gets into such a system needs to have a notion of data quality. Otherwise, shit in, shit out, right? So that's an important aspect altogether, right?
Yeah, and there was a couple other big ones, like we had a whole data lake strategy, and the strategy was push all the data into Snowflake without having like a really curated, contextualized data customers. That was a big one. Again, it's on the enterprise data side, but it's something you need to consume. And I'm talking about work management systems, financial systems, all of that information we want to relate in the twin, but it comes down to the data source. So getting governance on where your data is being produced and having standards there so data can flow up into other platforms is really important.
And
all right, we do have one here. Also, while we're getting to that question, I'll say we have several presentations in this room today as well that are going to dig in deep with a few of these panelists that are focused on some of these topics as well.
One of our biggest roadblocks with large facility owners is who's going to pay for it, right? You've got director of innovation, you've got capital improvements, maintenance, safety, so on and so forth. Nobody wants to pay for it, right? It's in this budget, it's in that budget. It's a shared cost ultimately. And reality capture is easier to sell because there's an immediate benefit. It's a return on investment. 2D to 3D, that whole, it's immediate return on investment. Digital twins is not. I heard that just a minute ago. It's not immediate, and no one wants to share the cost. So I want to hear how you all have gotten over that hump with facility owners.
Well, I mean, if we just call it a digital twin, it's a mysterious thing that has to be defined, so it's hard to quantify. But if I look at one of our 6 projects, and I can talk about what are the data requirements, outputs, and the value of doing work that way, it is easy to see the value. Excuse me. So we're looking at, as I mentioned, $150 million of those service contracts to be able to reduce that dollar by about 25%, and that's a 5-year goal. But I think it's very achievable based on the research. And we have our head of infrastructure is bought into that. And if you look at operations, everyone is bought into this concept of moving to predictive, right? And the cost of failures or downtimes are massive. You can quantify that, but it has to be built into the project. And the stakeholder that has to be involved, which is not always involved, is the one that is managing and operating those assets. And then another one is going to be IT. IT has to be involved because they have the technical resources. They can navigate the data security challenges and mitigate those vulnerabilities. So you got to have a partnership. And unfortunately, at a capital project stage, it doesn't involve all those stakeholders all the time. So you really need to bring those stakeholders into that conversation because they're going to end up getting the handover data. But you're right. Like, who pays for it, right? In a capital project, they don't want to bring the prices up, but you might be able to justify doing that capital project based on the 30-year savings to your buildings. So there's a lot of arguments to say from an energy reduction, carbon, or operational efficiencies. So those arguments can come in to support the capital project and allow some budget to create the materials as they need to.
I think a lot of it is where's the pain, right? The pain is where the money is, right? And so you got to find where there's the biggest pain in that, whatever food chain of a company and go like, there's big pain here. That's where you're going to find reasons to justify the spending. Areas where there's like improving, HR, training of employees, stuff like that is all great benefits. These are benefits. It's not a pain. Nobody's in HR is going to start commanding a full digital twin for a manufacturing site because they're going to improve HR onboarding, right? But if they have a twin that engineering departments or other teams have invested because they have pain to improve their efficiency, reduce risk and capital errors in their investments, then the benefits comes to the other areas of the business.
Last comment.
Yeah, so think of supply and demand, right? Where's the demand? If HR is the demand signal, meet the demand signal. What you're saying with reality capture is that's the demand signal, right? And actually, so John Niles in the back at 2:00, he's got a presentation in here. He's got a chart in there that shows the hype cycle, and generally most people are familiar with the hype cycle at this point from Gardner. There's a hidden curve in the hype cycle most people don't know about. And I think it's called the market opportunity or the business opportunity. And that hidden curve is what you're talking about, right? So there's all this additional sale, but for your demand signal, that's the slow growth curve that underlies the big parabola. So I would suggest identify that, right? Understand that, and then engage with it. If that's HR, if that's manufacturing in industrial systems, that's the best thing that I could say to respond to that.
I think what fails to happen is just enough thought and strategies put into understanding the business problems that can be solved, and having a master plan done with actual roadmaps to how to complete those. It's hard to make the business decisions when the thought hasn't been done and we don't really kind of understand where we're going. And that's where you get a lot of leadership come to conferences like this. They see tools they want to implement, but it's a foundational business problem. So, you might be right. It's easy to sell reality capture to your stakeholders because of who you're dealing with, but there could very well be value. I found value from departments I had no clue they were going to get value from things, right? But after you really start to flesh that out and document it and quantify it, then you can start to align. Okay, well, these 4 departments in this order are going to get value from this project, and it's going to mean this dollar figure. So that's what we're going to start with. And let that drive the journey, as opposed to kind of, we bought this platform and we need this data and we got to get it in, because we won't have data we won't have value until we get that data in. So let the business drive the outcomes.
And I think, like, from people adopting the technology to the end owners adopting this idea, a lot of it also comes from people deciding to champion this idea, right? And I've seen that happen a lot, even from the biggest organizations we look at. There's this one guy who had the idea, who kept working on it for a year or two, and now it's a company-wide mission. So I think that it comes back to the individuals too, saying, like, be creative, take risks, try new things, go pitch people in your own company. And then we see those champions really help grow this adoption. We are out of time. We're rolling straight into Kelly Watt's presentation. But please give it up for our panel, and I'm sure they'll want to meet you after as well. Thank you. Stick around for Kelly's presentation.